Hey, this is an example of how I would typically do my workflow from start to finish. And first I would import into Lightroom. When I'm using Lightroom 4, if you've not upgraded, I think it's definitely worth the expense for that. Lightroom 4 added a number of really good features that I think make it an excellent program. So this is one of the student photographs, and I put it on the desktop. It's a raw file, and we don't want all of those things. All I want is the NEF file. Now, if you've not set up your metadata preset, I would really recommend that you go ahead and do that. I'll show you. I'll set it for mine. To edit presets. Now, this is a place where you'd want to edit in or add in your copyright status. So for sure we want to have this as copyrighted, and we're going to put a little symbol, which is 0169, holding down the Alt key on a PC, and it's Command G on a Mac. The date, the year, and then your name. Now, of course, I'm importing a file that actually doesn't belong to me, so understand that, but you should have your own information here. And for the rights, do all rights reserved, and then your website. I also would like to see you add in all of this information here. If you don't put in your creator information and make it very easy for people to find you, then what will happen is you'll lose out on licensing opportunities. If people find your image online, they really like to use it for a campaign, but they don't have any way to figure out how to contact you, then you're really missing out on an opportunity. Now, if you're not a commercial photographer, don't plan to be, then that might be a pretty small area of concern. But if you are focusing on clients, portraiture, that kind of thing, then where it's going to come into importance for you is if your clients have an image and you shared it with them and they tried to make a print. If they took it to a lab, then the lab would look at that and they'd have to ask, okay, this is copyrighted to Michael Cloth and all rights reserved. There's nothing here to suggest that anybody other than myself or the people that I assign are able to make prints of that legally. And so by including your contact information there, then they can contact you. They say, does so-and-so really have permission to use your work to make a print? And if you are giving your clients digital files, you're really missing out on an important revenue opportunity for your business. And sometimes you share a file as kind of a proof, and it's not quite fully optimized or whatever. And you definitely don't want to have those things printed up, because those are not a good representation of what your final product is, and that represents you and your brand. So definitely go ahead and fill in all of this. I have a PO box that I use, and I think that works really well for this, rather than using your home address, although that's fine too. And include a phone number they can get in touch with you. Now, if you don't want to use your cell phone or your home phone, and arguably that's a good reason, or a couple of good things that you would not want to use, there's ways to get additional phone lines. Through Skype, you can for an additional fee have a phone number. You can do Google Voice, and you can get a phone number there, and that's free. So there's definitely options for you, and you can choose whichever area code, or even somewhat to a certain extent what phone number you want from those services. Definitely check it out. Now, these are sticky settings, and so we're going to give this a name, and we're going to say done, preset, save it as a new preset, put a name that's appropriate. Done. And so now this is going to be a sticky preset. This is always going to be there, and so you don't have to remember to add that every single time you import. It's also a good idea to add in any keywords. Now this wasn't one of my photographs, so I'm going to put the person who made it in there. Obviously this is a portrait, so you know that would be appropriate. You know, mom, baby, it looks like. Infant would be appropriate, parent. Anything that's going to help you find this photograph later on is a good thing to include. So we do that, it imports it, and it goes here into the library catalog. Next thing I'd do is I'd bring it right into the develop module, assuming I was ready to edit it. Now, it looks like everything here has, well, it's a multiple lighting situation. So here we have a cool background, presumably window light. Here we have a warm portrait from presumably tungsten light. And when you have a mixed lighting situation like this, you have to decide when you set your white balance in camera, are you going to shoot for the skin tones, you're going to shoot for the background? Generally speaking, I recommend that you shoot for the area that's most important in an image. And for a portrait, that's going to be, obviously, that's going to be the skin tones. And so here, we're just going to go ahead and change the white balance setting to tungsten. And you can see we're pretty close to where we need to be. It's probably a little bit blue, but what happened is all of this background really became way too blue. Now, I think that this isn't quite ideal, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust this temperature slider a little bit and bring this up. And I think here we have a little bit of warmth. The baby is still pretty blue, and you don't want people to be blue or have any color cast anyways, but especially babies, because a blue baby is not a healthy baby. So what we're going to do next is we're going to go to the brush mode. And with previous versions, you didn't have the benefit of doing exposure and changing white balance setting. Excuse me. You had the exposure. You didn't have the benefit of changing the temp and the tint. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to warm up selectively parts of this image. And we're not going to get it perfect, and we certainly could spend a lot of time trying to get it perfect here, but we want to also do some, for the sake of the demo, do some work in Photoshop. So I'm going to leave some of it behind. So we're going to do a new point. With the defaults here, the flow and the density are always at 100%. That's way too high to get a nice effect. You want to have these things relatively feathered, so you want your feather up, and by moving your flow and density down, then you're gonna allow yourself the opportunity to be much less precise in the way that you're doing your editing. Now, I don't really care about exposure at this point, although we could probably bring this up a little bit. I don't like to do too many edits with one specific point. I'd much rather do my first point doing the general color change, then make another brush point and you know, maybe smoothing out the exposure a little bit. So we're going to change this here. We're going to work on the temperature. So here, by default, it goes to whatever your last setting was. I want this a little warmer, so that's a good thing. The one thing that you might find is that if you put these things on 100%, it makes it a little easier to see what you're doing, and then you want to fine-tune your edit after the fact. So here we do a little brushing, and you can see that's warmed up quite a bit. We're going to do some of this background here. And because we're doing a low flow and density, we're going to need to do several brush strokes in order to get a good effect. It's a good idea to change your brush size for different areas of the image. So here we went a little too far. Having too small of a brush is going to give you artifacts, and so you want to have at least a decent sized brush when you're doing these kind of edits. We still got some issues there. Come in a little bit on her face. And there you can see we're making a little bit of progress here. If you go back in the history, then you can see you know, what all of these steps have done. Let me just close this preset here so we can see more. So here's where the final is. Here's where we started. And you can see we're making a little bit of progress there. Probably want to increase the flow and density just a little bit. Make those a little bit more prominent. And we'll go from there. The next thing that I would do, I'd turn off the brush. I'd probably do a little bit of, I'd probably bring up these shadow values a little bit. I'd be concerned that the dark shirt here isn't going to print very well. So move the shadow slider just a bit. You can see that we got some good detail there. It also brought up some of these skin tones. Now, we talk in class about doing global edits before you do the local edits. When you're going to do something like warm up a color, really it's best to do all of these kind of global edits first, but some edits it's more important to do, well, let's just say sometimes when you're doing these local edits, it's not quite as important to do the global first. It just really kind of depends, and you need to kind of just go based on your judgment and your experience here. Remove the clarity a little bit, the vibrance up just a little bit. Now, if we thought that the blues were here still way too prominent, and I think that we can argue that they are, we can go down to the HSL palette. And here I've got everything selected, but we can go just to the HSL simplified a little bit, and we can change the saturation and luminance. Now, one of the things you can do is you can activate these panels, and then you can click and drag right in the image, and you can see how that makes a huge difference, making some of those tones come way down. It's going to know based on the pixel value that you're selecting which colors need to be adjusted. So here's predominantly blue, which of course we predict. There's also a little bit of aqua in there, which really isn't much of a surprise. Blues and aquas tend to go, you know, hand in hand. Now, bringing the saturation down, sometimes it helps also to change the luminance. Now, if we wanted to bring these values up, you can see how that works. If you want to bring it down, you can see how that works. Now, because we took the time to warm up the skin tones here in the baby and the mom beforehand, we're not really affecting these areas too much. So this is one of the reasons why I think it's okay to adjust the colors before you locally before you go and do a global change like what you have here. Had I done this change here first with the saturation, it would have changed the values here in the baby's head in a way that we'd have to make up for then in the local correction. So if you do, you just have to understand that there's situations where doing it one way or the other is going to give you a little bit of benefit. And so it's just one of those things you're going to need some practice in order to really have a good feel for. When you're done using these tools, you need to click on the circle to turn it back off. Otherwise, if you inadvertently click over here, you're still making those kind of edits, even if that palette, you scrolled way up past that. Most portraits can stand to have a little bit of contrast, so we're going to do some of that. I think that her eyes are a little dark here, so we're going to do another brush. This time we're going to do an exposure. You can see this is where I had it set last time, so that's fine for a starting place. We're going to just go ahead and brush. So I'm being a little sloppy here, and you can see how what I've done is gone way too far. And that's okay, because what you can do then is you can bring these values back down to where it's appropriate. So we brought those values down. It doesn't look too bad here. We might also consider bringing the shadows up, because obviously that's shadow region, and that's going to affect this area more than it would do, say, the highlights on the nose. So that's a good thing. And overall, we added some contrast. You look at the histogram, it looks pretty good. We don't want to go too much farther to the right because we have some obvious areas here where we would lose some detail. But again, you know, if we bump this up a little bit, make sure that we have good exposures for, you know, the skin tones, then what we can do is we can use the brush tool to correct any places where we made where we created some clipping, but we didn't do any of that. You can see that we have some shadow clipping here, so we'll click on that, and we have just one color here. So if it had been full shadow clipping, then it would have a black. Because it's just showing the green, then it means just one of the channels actually has clipping, and if you click on it, then you would see a layer mask, but because it's so minor, I don't even see the layer mask, so it's not going to be a big area for concern. So assuming that you're more or less happy with what we got here, and I think now that we've made these adjustments, that maybe the vibrance is a little too high. We maybe have a little bit of orange skin tones we've added here. Might want to change the tint just a little bit. You got to be pretty careful with these things. Now in Photoshop, we talked about how you can use the Eyedropper tool in order to do some of these white balance correctings. Now I'm going to make a virtual copy here. So if you right click, then you can come up and make virtual copies so that I don't undo everything I just did. The alternate here is use the white balance selector. So you would imagine this is probably pretty white. It should be neutral. So if you click there, then you can see how that edits it right from the beginning. One of the nice things about the Eyedropper tool in Lightroom is that it gives you an expanded view of the pixels, so you know exactly where you're choosing. So if we were trying to make the background neutral, we'd probably choose one of these spots here. And unlike in Photoshop where you would select the highlight or shadow or the midtone, this one is just kind of an overall. So you can see we picked a pretty good area to make this background neutral, but what we did is we made the portrait here way too orange. So in that case, what we would do is, if we decided we like the background, this is perfect, then we'll go back to the temperature. We'd want to bring this, and we probably want to bring the tint down a little bit too, and then we would change these values selectively. But you can see that this isn't exactly a quick and easy way to go. Of course, we can change the flow and density if you wanted to kind of rough in. But now I'm starting to add some greens in here, so it really takes a bit of fine-tuning. The easiest thing to do is find the most important part of the image, get that more or less correct, and then worry about the background after the fact. So we'll turn off the brush tool. We're going to go back to this original one, and next we're going to bring that into Photoshop. So there's two ways to do it. If you right click, you can either edit in Photoshop, and this is going to make it just a standard background layer. If you do as a smart object, then what happens is if you realize that you made a little bit of an error, then you can go back and you can correct these things on the raw level using the Adobe Camera Raw. One other thing I wanted to point out that I probably should have started from the beginning is that by default, I'd like you to select, assuming you have Lightroom 4, the Remove Chromatic Aberration. If you do this first, then you can do Develop, and then you can do Set Default Settings, and you can do Update to Current Settings. So everything I've edited here would update to this setting. So obviously I don't want all of these things applied to every image, but had I done this one first, that would be appropriate. So the Chromatic Aberration tool here will remove fringes that you get, and this would be an area where you might see it, where you have an area going from dark to light, and I don't know if this image actually has it or not. Doesn't look like it. Turn it back off. There's maybe a little bit of purple fringing here. It goes away. But what I found is that this tool here in Lightroom 4 is so improved and sophisticated that it really doesn't hurt any of the images to have it on, and it often helps to have it on. So here we are, we're going to go into Photoshop. We're just going to go as a straight background layer. Control or Command D will get you there too. So here we are, we have our background layer, and we talked about using some tools like curves and with the specific highlight, gray, and shadow region. Now what we can do is, now that we're working on layers, and of course you can find very specific points to see, you know, which areas would be the highlights or not. But it's also, you know, pretty easy just to kind of click and see how it goes. You really don't have a lot lost by trying to sample different areas. And let's see how that looks. Overall, not too bad. You can see it made everything a lot brighter. We're a little bit closer to neutral back there, but it introduced some color shifts down here. Now the real benefit of working in Lightroom is that you've got Photoshop, is that you've got layer mask. So after you make your first edit, so we're going to call this background adjustment, we can work on the layer mask. If we paint with a black, you make sure it's selected here, paint with a black brush. Again, if you keep your opacity and flow relatively low, and we'll say 20-ish%, then that's going to give you a nice feathered effect. And so you don't have to worry so much about being exact in your painting. So we just go ahead and brush it on there, and you can see how we're getting some black marks here on the layer mask. So we're going to say that's actually not too bad. What happened here, now we still have some area of blue. So what I want to do now is really fine-tune this blue color channel. And again, if you're working with a properly calibrated monitor, you can really trust what you're seeing here. Now, if I move this up, you can see more blue, and so if you bring it down, then you get the resulting yellow. I think that actually looks better. If you look at this little button here, this gives you before and after. If you hit this one by mistake, that resets the whole thing, so you don't want to do that. So I think we're getting pretty close to where we want to be. I'm not real happy here with the skin tones, so I'm going to add in another curves layer. And here I think we have a little bit too much yellow, a little bit too much red, and I think with the mom we have a little bit too much yellow. So we're going to start with that, and of course the opposite of blue is yellow, and we're going to bring this up just a little bit. Now, I think the mom looks really good here. We've added some of the blue back in, so we're gonna just do a mom layer. And again, because we only want this to be applied locally, we're going to use a layer mask. But because this is a relatively small portion of the image, instead of painting with black, what we're going to do is we're going to invert this. So Control-I is going to invert it to all black. So now we paint with white to reveal. And again, low opacity, low flow is a good way to go. And I'm going to even lower this a little bit more. And we just kind of paint in as needed. And you can see we're starting to get some effect there. Now, I think that the baby can handle a little bit of this kind of adjustment, but not nearly as much as mom. And of course, infants have a much different skin tone than adults or even older children. So it's very common that you would have to do a different edit for the adult than you would for an infant. So here we're going to do another curves. I'm going to call this baby. And again, we're going to want to reverse this, but first we're going to do our edit. And we're going to start with red because I think there's too much red. So we'll bring that down a little bit. I think that's pretty good. So this is a pretty subtle shift, but when you get to this point, you want to be pretty subtle. You don't want your edits to be so strong as to call attention to it. So we'll call that pretty good. Maybe even just down a little bit more. Actually, maybe instead of that, we're going to bring up the tonal values of this a little bit. So we're going to be in the RGB master mode. If you click on this first button, then you can click and drag up, just like you would do in Lightroom with the little circle icon activated. So I'm pretty happy with that. Again, we're going to invert this, so it's Control or Command I, depending on you got PC or Mac. Otherwise, you can do Image, you can do Adjustments, and then you can do Invert. So we want to make sure we're painting with the white brush, and we're going to bring those values in. And you can see we've made a subtle change. That's good. While we're here, I want to bring up the shirt just a little bit because I'm worried that that's not going to print well. So that's how I would approach a global and local edit for an image from start to finish. There's definitely other things that I would do from here. You know, if there were any imperfections of the skin, I'd smooth those out. You know, here we've got a little bit of a, just by the lighting, it looks like she's got a little bit of bag under her eyes. And so we could smooth that out a little bit, and I can show you how I do that real quick. We'll add another curves layer. This time I'm going to bring up all these values, and just kind of in a crazy way, we want it to be exaggerated. We're going to again invert this, Control or Command I, and we're going to, you know, call this up. You can also label it dodging and burning if you want to use a traditional manner, traditional names for these kind of things. So here we go into 100% mode, low opacity and flow. We're going to make the brush quite a bit smaller, and I think I went too far on that, so we're going to go undo. We're going to lower this even more. A little bit here too. Now the image is a little bit soft. I don't think there's really detail to be recovered. There's tricks that you can do to bring that back. But I think that's kind of beyond the scope of the video. And if you have questions about that, then certainly you can let me know. So, if you have any questions about any of this, please let me know. This is a very rough kind of job. Obviously, when you're doing your edits, you want to be focused on what you're doing, not talking and narrating at the same time. That kind of changes how you approach your edits a little bit. So don't mistake this as a fully polished image, but definitely understand this is the general sort of techniques that I would be using. I might consider adding another curves layer, bringing these values down. Having a little bit of a rim light is fine. I don't think that these are too far. You could bring those down. I'd probably also want to selectively warm up this little part on her chin, where she's getting a little bit of blue light coming in from the light. And so you really need to evaluate these things at 100% in order to fully know exactly where you need to make your edits. One of the easy ways to do that, and of course any edit I recommend you do that on a separate adjustment layer, or if you're going to edit out little spots, then you would want to do it on a new layer so that you can always go back and modify. So if you do Control-Alt-0 or Command-Alt-0, that gets you to 100%. Click on the Home button, and that brings you to the top left corner. And then I would just kind of go down, you know, see. So this one here, I'm sure it's just a little mole, but you know, as an example, I would use the healing brush. And I actually don't like the spot healing brush as well. The difference between spot healing and healing is the spot healing just kind of samples from areas around it, whereas the healing brush allows you the opportunity to show you, you know, choose where you're sampling from. So for here, I would sample there, alt click, and just, you know, do these little things. Now, if you turn off your layer, you can see what that looks like. And this is how I would go and smooth up the skin. I think I introduced a couple of little errors here, and so, you know, I touch it up and get it to where I want. Now, understand that a light touch is usually the best option, and just applying to get your edit either on or off is rarely the right idea. And so you're much better off doing multiple brush strokes to complete an edit than you are just to try to do it all in one brush stroke. So I think that looks pretty good. So we go back to the edge and then bring it down. If you did a Control or Command page down, it's going to move you over one full screen size over to the right, and if you did a Control Command page up, it would do you to the left. So you can see here I introduced a little bit of area where I've got overexposed. So what I would want to do here is, this is where I would use a down, bring this down to where I want it, and actually click it in. No, it's down there, that's fine. Of course, anytime you add a new layer, it's going to do it one above where you are. We're going to call this down. Again, dodging and burning would be appropriate as well. So again, we're going to paint with white. And just bring these values down since we introduced a little bit of a blown highlight with some of our edits. So this is really important. Shows why it's really important to look at these things at 100% pixels, because otherwise you wouldn't necessarily know that you made some areas that need adjusting. Move this up just a little bit. We just continue on with the quick overview of everything, and assuming that you're happy with that, go ahead and save it as your master file, and we call that done. Again, let me know if you have any questions, and hopefully I've given you some good food for thought here.